The sun was scorching, music blasting, and the water in my pool glistened like paradise, until I saw a crowd of strangers splashing around. And her, Karen, holding a clipboard, barking orders, and acting like she owned the place. Then came the final straw. "You need to leave the pool area. You're making the guests uncomfortable." My jaw dropped. Uncomfortable? In my own backyard? I could feel my pulse rise as I scanned the crowd. Not a single person there was invited. I wasn't just kicked out of my own pool. I was humiliated, trespassed against, and disrespected on my own property. But she had no idea what I was about to do next. Because when I flipped that hidden switch, her perfect party turned into a watery nightmare, and it was 100% legal. It started like any other Saturday. I'd planned to catch up on some emails, maybe mow the lawn later if the sun eased up. I was in my living room when I first heard it. Faint thumping bass from a speaker, followed by bursts of laughter and the unmistakable sound of splashing water. At first, I thought the neighbors were throwing a pool party, until it dawned on me. I was the only house on the block with a pool. My stomach turned. I walked toward the back door, confused, and when I pulled back the curtains, I froze. There were dozens of people in my backyard, kids racing around with pool noodles, adults lounging like it was some kind of resort, and a full DJ booth blaring music at the edge of my patio. My private pool had been turned into a public circus, and I didn't recognize a single face. I threw on my sandals and marched outside, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There were coolers, a table with snacks. Someone had even dragged patio furniture from my shed. Who gave them access? Why were they here? And then I saw her, Karen. She stood near the deep end with a clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on her head like some self-appointed ruler. Karen, the newest member of the HOA board. She'd only lived here for 6 months, but you'd think she ran the entire county by the way she carried herself. I pushed through the crowd, dodging beach balls and wet towels, until I reached her. "Karen, what the hell is going on?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. She turned toward me casually, like I was some nosy neighbor interrupting a scheduled tour. "Oh, you're here," she said, as if my presence was a mild inconvenience. "This is the community summer kickoff. The board approved it. We figured your property was perfect for the event." I blinked, stunned. "You figured my private backyard was perfect?" She didn't flinch. "You didn't respond to the HOA email threads, so we assumed you were fine with it." My jaw clenched. "I never saw those emails, and even if I did, you can't just take over someone's home like it's a public park." Karen laughed, a short, smug little sound. "Well, technically, as part of the HOA, all properties fall under certain community guidelines. And besides, everyone's having a great time." I looked around. Kids had left wet footprints on my deck. Someone had plugged a blender into my outdoor outlet. One guy, a total stranger, was drinking beer from one of my personal mugs. I felt like I was trapped in a bizarre dream where reality bent around Karen's delusions. I tried to keep calm. "You didn't ask. You didn't get permission. You broke into my yard." Karen rolled her eyes and motioned toward the guests. "Honestly, you're kind of making things uncomfortable. If you're going to be like this, maybe it's best if you just go back inside." That did it. My blood boiled. I was standing on my patio in my yard, next to my pool, and she was talking to me like I was some uninvited guest at her event. I felt every ounce of rage surging up as I stared at the woman who had somehow convinced herself that this wasn't theft or trespassing. It was community service. I took one last glance around. My yard was trashed. My privacy was gone. And Karen was smiling like she'd just hosted the gala of the year. I didn't say another word. I turned around and went back inside. Not to hide, not to sulk, but to plan. She thought she could treat me like I didn't matter, that I'd just roll over and let this happen. But she had no idea what she'd just triggered. Because while she was busy playing pool party princess, I was about to show her exactly what happens when you disrespect someone on their own land, and it was going to be loud, legal, and impossible to forget. Once I got back inside, I paced around like a kettle about to blow. I couldn't just let this happen. I needed answers. So I went straight to my home office and opened my email. I scrolled through the HOA's ridiculous flood of newsletters, but there was nothing specific. No clear approval, no formal request, nothing that even hinted at this level of trespass. Just vague phrases like community unity and pool opportunity buried in their usual garbage about lawn heights and mailbox paint. That's when it hit me. If they didn't officially request this through email, how did Karen even plan it? I spun my chair toward the corner where my security system monitor glowed. My cameras had full coverage of the yard, front and back. I clicked through the playback and rewound to 2 nights ago, and what I saw made my skin crawl. It was 11:37 p.m., dark, quiet, uneventful, until 3 figures crept into view on the back camera. One of them had a flashlight, another carried what looked like a toolbox. I recognized Karen immediately, her unmistakable blonde bun bobbing like some low-budget villain in a heist movie. I watched in disbelief as they snipped the lock off my side gate and propped it open with a landscaping rock. They broke in, days before the party. It wasn't just rude, it was premeditated. But it gets worse. I switched over to the front camera and noticed something taped to my mailbox. I paused the footage, zoomed in, and felt bile rise in my throat. It was a flyer, bright, colorful, with a big sun wearing sunglasses and bold red text that read, "Community Pool Bash, Saturday 2 p.m., my address." And under it, Karen's name as event organizer. This wasn't a miscommunication. This was organized trespassing, and Karen had used my address like it was a city park. She hadn't just bent the rules, she bulldozed through them. At that point, I stopped thinking like a neighbor and started thinking like a man preparing for war. I went outside and scanned my property with a new lens. Every scratch on my fence, every scuff on the patio tile. These weren't guests. They were intruders. People had helped themselves to my pool toys, moved my grill, and someone had even unplugged my freezer to hook up a stupid bubble machine. What blew my mind even more? I remembered that Karen didn't have a pool. Her yard was all rock and cactus. That's why she hosted it at my place. She used her HOA position as a weapon to take what she didn't have, and because I was just a resident, she thought I'd stay quiet. But I wasn't just a resident. I was the owner. I printed out screenshots from the footage. I saved digital copies of everything. Then I began making calls. First, to my lawyer, then to the sheriff's office, because if they thought they could vandalize and occupy my home without consequences, they were about to learn what real accountability looks like. Karen had played her game. Now, it was my turn. And mine was going to leave her reputation soaked in humiliation and dripping with regret. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about setting an example. They thought they won. Karen had her sunglasses on, soaking in the victory like it was sun-baked glory. Her guests were clinking glasses, floating on my inflatables, blasting music from a speaker that wasn't even mine. I didn't say a word. I just walked inside, dead calm, but burning inside. What they didn't know is that I had designed this pool myself, and not just for swimming. I'd been meticulous about safety and maintenance, and one feature I insisted on was a full-force emergency drainage system connected to a secured digital panel inside the house. It could drain every drop in under 6 minutes, quicker if I boosted the pump setting. Most people wouldn't install something like that unless they had a very specific reason. And that day, I had one. I sat down at my laptop and pulled up the system. One button. That's all it took. But I wasn't going to just press it yet. I wanted to make sure every angle of this moment would be caught, not just in memory, but on camera. Because this wasn't just about watching them flail in confusion. This was evidence, a calculated legal response to criminal trespassing. I had every right, and this time I was documenting everything. I adjusted the camera angles from my app, zoomed in on the pool, then double-checked that my hard drive was recording. I also screen recorded my own system in real time, showing the temperature, water level, pump activity, all of it tied to my property and under my control. Then I walked back outside like nothing happened, holding a soda can just for effect. Karen looked up from the lounge chair like she expected me to beg her to leave. Instead, I took a sip, smiled, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You know, Karen, maybe you're right. Maybe I should step back." She gave a smug, self-satisfied laugh, lifting her drink like it was a toast. I took another sip. "And drain the problem." The smile froze on her face. The first thing they noticed was the strange gurgle echoing from the deep end. Then came the whirlpool. A few partygoers laughed, thinking it was a feature or part of the party, until the water started vanishing before their eyes. It wasn't subtle. The main drains roared alive, sucking gallons per second. Beach balls dipped, floats bottomed out, and the water line dropped like a ticking timer of doom. The pool jets reversed, blowing air instead of water. People screamed and scrambled off the slick tiles, soaking wet and stumbling as the very thing they were celebrating in disappeared beneath them. Karen stood up, stunned, watching the pool literally collapse on itself. Her hair was soaked, her dress clinging to her legs, mascara bleeding down her cheeks. "What are you doing?" she screeched. I didn't answer. I just looked over at the blinking red light on the camera I'd placed on the balcony. Every second was being recorded. One woman slipped, trying to get out. A man dropped his plate of food into the sludge. Karen started yelling at her guests to stay calm, like this was some natural disaster that had struck unexpectedly. No, Karen, this wasn't nature. This was me. The best part? There wasn't a single rule broken. On my side. The property was mine. The water system was mine. The guests were uninvited trespassers, caught on video, and I had dozens of digital timestamps and camera angles to prove it. As the last bit of water spiraled into the drainage system, what remained was a soaked deck, stunned partygoers, and Karen, angry, humiliated, and finally quiet. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just took out my phone, pressed a button, and showed her the footage from 2 nights earlier, her snipping the lock, breaking in, and taping flyers. "This is going to the sheriff Monday," I said calmly. She opened her mouth to scream, but nothing came out, because she knew what came next. I flipped the switch. For a few seconds, everything stayed quiet, almost too quiet. Then, like a monster awakening from the depths, the drain system kicked in with a deep, mechanical growl. The water started spinning, subtly at first, just enough to catch the corner of someone's eye. And then it got louder. The swirling intensified. Inflatables started shifting. Drinks began floating. A beach ball slowly drifted toward the deep end before getting violently pulled under. That's when the screaming began. One of the kids shrieked as his unicorn float tipped, sending him into the cold, churning mess. A woman near the steps slipped, trying to escape. Cups, sunglasses, snacks. Everything was moving now. The whirlpool was relentless, and no one could figure out what was happening. Karen's frozen smile melted into wide-eyed panic. "What the hell is going on with the pool?" I stood by the gate, arms crossed, not saying a word, just watching it unfold. Then suddenly, the main drainage valve let out a loud, shuddering hiss, and the entire pool started collapsing inward. Water levels dropped fast, like time-lapse footage in real life. The deep end was the first to empty, then the rest followed like a domino line of liquid chaos. People were scrambling now, some were cursing, others just stared in disbelief as the very thing they were enjoying seconds ago literally disappeared beneath them. A guy yelled, "Who turned on the drain?" Karen turned to me. "You! You did this! This is sabotage!" I stayed calm. "No, Karen. This is property management. Unlike what you're doing, which is trespassing." That word hit like a slap. The silence that followed was heavier than the air after a thunderstorm. She stormed toward me, soaked from head to toe, stilettos squishing in the wet concrete. She was holding some wrinkled paper in her hand, probably some fake HOA permit she printed out herself. Her mouth opened, ready to spew more nonsense. But right then, the side gate creaked open, and in stepped a uniformed sheriff's deputy. Not just any deputy, the same one who helped me file my last HOA harassment complaint. The one I'd already emailed with all the footage, timestamps, and trespassing records from earlier that week. Karen froze mid-step, her eyes darting from me to him. He looked around, surveyed the mess of confused, wet guests standing in a half-empty pool, and then locked eyes with Karen. "Ma'am," he said calmly but firmly, "you and these individuals were not invited onto this property. Is that correct?" Karen stuttered. No, but this is community access." "No," I interrupted, stepping forward. "This is my private pool, installed on my land, maintained with my money. I've submitted the zoning paperwork to the county, and it's clearly stated that this pool is not part of any shared HOA amenities." The deputy nodded. "That checks out. I've reviewed the property lines." Karen's face turned red, part rage, part fear. "I'm going to need everyone here to leave immediately," he continued. "You're all trespassing. Any refusal to comply may result in formal charges." The guests didn't argue. They grabbed their towels, shoes, and phones, dripping and defeated. They filed out one by one, heads low, trying to preserve some shred of dignity. Some glared at Karen, realizing they'd been dragged into something they didn't understand. Karen was the last to move. She looked around at the drenched chaos she caused, at the empty pool, the angry faces, the deputy now calling in the incident, and finally at me. Her face twisted into a mix of humiliation and fury. "You think this is over?" she spat. "You think draining your stupid pool makes you right?" I smiled, this time for real. Number. But the sheriff's department, the footage, and my lawyer do. She didn't have a comeback for that. She stormed off, heels clicking with each angry step, the paper in her hand now a soggy mess. And I stood there, beside the deputy, watching her leave like a storm cloud breaking apart. It wasn't just revenge. It was justice. The energy shifted the moment the second sheriff's cruiser pulled up. The first deputy had already started dispersing the remaining guests, most of whom were soaking wet and walking barefoot across my gravel path like a soggy parade of shame. The mood had turned from party to prosecution in less than 10 minutes. Karen wasn't done yet, though. She was still pacing by the half-drained pool, flinging her arms like an inflatable tube man outside a used car dealership, ranting to whoever would listen, which, at this point, was nobody. Her mascara had started to run, her expensive white blouse was stained with chlorine, and the only thing louder than her voice was the suction of the last bit of water disappearing into the pool's main drain. The second deputy, older and far less patient, approached with a clipboard and a firm jawline. He looked at me first, gave a nod of recognition, clearly having reviewed the report, and then walked straight up to Karen. "Ma'am, are you Karen Monroe?" he asked. She hesitated, still trying to figure out if she could talk her way out of this. "Yes, but I'm on the HOA board. This whole thing is being blown out of proportion." He didn't even blink. "Ma'am, as a board member, you should be well aware that you are not above the law. You entered a property you don't own, without consent, after previously being warned not to. You cut a private lock, hosted an event here, and ignored clear zoning documents." She scoffed. "It's a community pool." "No, ma'am," he said, flipping the clipboard to show her. "This is a privately owned pool built on private land. The zoning was updated last year. I have the site plans and approval letters right here." Karen reached for the papers like she wanted to rip them in half. "Those are fake. He's manipulating the system." I stepped forward calmly and said, "That zoning approval came straight from the county office. You can call them." And that's when it hit her. There was no way out of this. The deputy pulled out a citation pad. You're being issued a criminal trespass warning. If you enter this property again without express written permission from the homeowner, you'll be arrested on the spot." Her mouth dropped open. "This is harassment. Ma'am, I suggest you stop talking unless you'd prefer to discuss this further at the station." It was the first time she shut up all day. He handed her the signed violation notice. She held it like it was made of poison. The remaining few guests, those still lingering under the impression that Karen knew what she was doing, slowly backed away and made for the exit. But the deputies weren't done yet. The first officer approached me again and quietly asked if I'd like to press charges for property damage and trespassing. I thought about it, about the bolt cutters, the broken lock, the party flyers, and the gallons of water wasted thanks to her idiocy. But I looked back at Karen, now standing alone on the cracked patio she tried to claim as her own. Her social power? Gone. Her status in the HOA? Shattered. The humiliation was already bigger than anything a courtroom could deliver. "I'm not pressing charges today," I said, loud enough for her to hear. "But the warning stands. She steps foot back on this property and I won't hesitate." The deputy nodded and walked away. Karen's eyes met mine, this time without fury or arrogance, just embarrassment, and a simmering awareness that she lost. The officers left. The gate finally swung closed behind the last guest, and the only sound left was the faint gurgle of the pool filters draining out the last bit of chlorinated chaos. I walked past Karen, didn't say a word, just handed her a towel from my own stack. She didn't take it, just turned and left, sloshing away in soaked heels, with dignity evaporating like the water she no longer had access to. But in that moment, the victory wasn't just mine. It was every homeowner's victory. Everyone who'd ever been pushed around by a clipboard-wielding tyrant in a polo shirt. Everyone who'd ever been told to follow rules that didn't exist by people who bent the real ones for themselves. I stood there in the sun, staring at the empty pool and smiling. It had never looked more peaceful. Draining the pool was poetic. But I knew one thing for sure. It wouldn't be enough. If I let this go, the HOA would find another reason. Another way to push boundaries. Another homeowner to target. So I did what Karen never expected. I lawyered up, not out of revenge, out of principle. The first thing my attorney and I did was compile the evidence. Security cam footage? We had her and her bolt cutters and 4K eyewitnesses. Several of the guests were more than happy to speak up. Many of them felt duped into showing up in the first place. HOA meeting notes? Oh, they were a gold mine. Karen had deliberately misled the board about the pool's ownership, claiming I had abandoned it and failed to maintain community assets. She conveniently left out that it was built entirely on my parcel, with my funding, and had no easement or access clause. I sued the HOA for trespassing, property damage, and emotional distress, and I named Karen personally in the claim. That caught everyone's attention. Suddenly, the rest of the board scrambled to distance themselves. We didn't know. Karen acted alone. We were misled. But the court didn't care about their excuses. When we got to the courtroom, the judge reviewed the documents, photos, and footage. Karen tried to spin her usual narrative, playing the victim, pretending it was all a misunderstanding, even throwing in some faux tears for good measure. She said, "I only did what I thought was best for the community." The judge wasn't buying it. He adjusted his glasses, looked her straight in the eye, and said, "You abused your authority, trespassed on private property, and endangered others by hosting an unapproved event. This is not a community issue. This is blatant personal misconduct." The verdict was swift. I won. The HOA was fined for failing to control one of its officers. They were ordered to pay for damages, legal fees, and issue a public apology. Karen? She was officially removed from the board, barred from holding any future HOA position, and issued a civil penalty for destruction of property. For the first time, she was held accountable, not just by reputation, but by law. When I got the check from the settlement, I didn't even cash it for a while, just held on to it, knowing what it represented, that you don't need to scream to fight back. Sometimes you just need to be smarter, quieter, deadlier. I used part of the money to install an upgraded security system, steel-reinforced locks, biometric access, high-resolution cameras, and floodlights that turned night into day. The rest I spent on what really mattered. 3 weeks later, the pool was filled again, sparkling, clean, peaceful. And then came the invites, only to close friends, neighbors who had supported me, and family. I hosted a reopening celebration like no other. Burgers, music, laughter, and not a single HOA board member in sight. I did send out one last invite, though. A single white envelope delivered by certified mail addressed to Karen. Inside, a formal card that read, "You are cordially uninvited. Private event, HOA not welcome." No threats, no insults. Just the kind of message she hated most. One she couldn't control. And in that moment, as I watched my niece jump into the pool with a splash, as my wife clinked lemonade glasses with our neighbors, I felt something deeper than satisfaction. Peace. Because this wasn't just about a pool. It was about standing up when you're pushed, about protecting your rights, about proving that no one, no HOA board member, no self-appointed tyrant gets to rewrite your life. They may have power, but we have something stronger: proof, patience, and persistence. Let Karen stew in the ruins of her reputation. Let the HOA rethink who they give authority to. As for me, I'll be floating in my pool, drink in hand, knowing I didn't just win a battle. I won the war. If this story fired you up even half as much as it did me, don't just scroll away. Hit that subscribe button right now and join the fight against HOA madness. There are thousands of stories like this out there, and we're telling them all. Drop a comment if you've ever been pushed around by an entitled HOA or Karen with a clipboard. And if you think justice was served today, smash that like button to show your support. This is just one of many outrageous tales we expose every week, right here on the HOA Stories, where we don't just tell the story, we make sure they never forget it.